Hello, 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 and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Spectrum, Every Age, Every Need. I am your host, Sean Francis, and I'm joined by my cousin and co-host, Maurice McDavid. And
Hello,
today we are
everyone.
going to be talking about a an ongoing topic. It seems like lately that the topics that we discuss are things that can't be covered in one episode. And if you take anything in the general public or that applies to the general population and apply it to those who are caregivers or parents to those with special needs or disabilities, it adds a whole twist and it matters twice as much, at least twice as much, if not more. And the topic for today is going to be, what does it mean to be a man? Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Spectrum. All right, let's jump right into it. First, I want to thank our partners at Billy Footwear, makers of fine adaptive footwear for everyone. The story of the founder of Billy Price is an amazing one. He became paralyzed and had to learn how to do everything for himself all over again, and he was successful in doing so with the exception of putting shoes on. So what became a prototype became Billy Footwear, and they have sold over 1 million pairs of shoes. You will find a link in the show notes where you can get 10% off your final price at their website, thanks to Beyond the Spectrum. And we also want to encourage you, if you or someone you know is a male and a parent or caregiver to someone with special needs or a disability, we encourage you and welcome you to join us for our men's group known as the Den. We meet bi-weekly on Zoom, and this past week especially, we had a very, very heartfelt conversation. Society doesn't encourage men to speak about their emotions and fears as well as triumphs and hopes. And the Den is a safe place to do just that. So let's go ahead and get right into it. Maurice, how you doing?
Good, good. And that little discussion about the den kind of really dives right into our conversation today. What does it mean to be a man? Um, when Sean suggested this subject matter, I'm like, how many episodes do we have for this? Because that is no small piece of subject matter. So I'm looking forward to today's conversation, at least scratching the surface, hopefully.
Yeah,
And actually,
yeah,
I'm here visiting my dad. So I'm kind of getting another look at caregiving because he has Alzheimer's, and was just having a conversation with his wife, and we were kind of on that same vibe of what it means to be a caregiver. So it'll be
yeah,
interesting, this conversation today.
yeah. And like I've always said, Elijah is now 19, and he was diagnosed with autism at 3, and it's only been about maybe 2 years since I've identified the fact that Laura and I are caregivers, because I hear that term and my first thought was thinking of, someone elderly being cared for, but it is far deeper than that. So when you talk about what it means to be a man, there's been a lot of talk about toxic masculinity, and I've heard some conversation about from those that feel that masculinity has gone by the wayside, and some
Mm.
that as a result of that feel very extreme and feel like women should just simply obey men and whatever have you. Well, let's go back to what our perspective is on that to begin with. My dad,
Mm.
my grandfather, my dad's dad, died when I was very young, so I don't have any memory of him. But from my understanding, he was a man's man. He was completely self-made. He did not finish high school, so he didn't go to college. But to say that he started several successful businesses and changed the lives of people in his family and his community would be a gross understatement. But I grew
Mm.
up obviously with my dad, having a fantastic relationship with him as I do now, better than ever. And him being my grandfather's son, he never told me that you shouldn't cry, but he was about being tough and strong.
Mm.
And it
Mm.
wasn't until later on in life that I realized, I remember thinking at a certain time that he wasn't affectionate with us, but he was. His affection was a little bit of rough housing and that kind
Mm.
of thing. So I had a
Mhm.
fairly
Mhm.
good balance between that and what it means to respect a woman and her right to have equality. And
Mm,
so my idea of what a man is somewhat, I would think, balanced. I think that there's muscle in tears,
mm,
as opposed to weakness. Um,
mm.
but at the same time, I don't think you need to run around and, I don't know, if you cry about everything, um, who does that
Mm,
necessarily serve? But you don't have to be one who feels that a woman's place is to be seen and not heard, just sit there and look pretty. And but there's a lot of that in our society, and there's a lot of back and forth. I've seen conversations on other podcasts where some women are like, I want to find a man who's going to take care of me, he's going to pay for my bills, he's going to do so and so. And I heard a comment to that, a response being, you know, be prepared, find a woman who doesn't need everything, but be prepared or able to give her everything. And this conversation can go or be framed around men and women generally speaking, but like anything that matters to the general population, it matters to our
mm.
community times more so, because think about it, we're challenged as caregivers anyway, and that's why the divorce rate in our community is so high. But talk a little bit about what your idea is of what it means to be a man and what masculinity means.
Oh. I don't know that I have an answer for that question, to be honest with you. For me, my message is to truly be who you are. Whatever that means from your core,
Mm-hmm.
whatever your core says to you about living in authenticity is, as a man, to me, that person's version of masculinity. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so it's very different, because I've also been exposed to the whole idea of some guys being simps. You know what I mean? That they're very
Mm-hmm.
accommodating to their women, and they
Yeah.
care for them, and they're emotionally available to them, and those guys are simps. And then there are guys who are withdrawn, not withdrawn, but very controlled in themselves and very self-assured, and they
Mm-hmm.
don't necessarily extend themselves to be an emotional support to their women. And there are some out there that said that's what women are attracted to. So I don't know about any and all of that. And so I kind of feel like I don't even want to try to form an opinion about what masculinity is, as opposed to saying, if you're a man and you're living out of your authentic self, then that to me is masculinity for that man. And so
Mm.
for me, I strive to live authentically after myself after many years of trying to live up to the image of what I thought a man was. So I can
There you
definitely
go.
talk about that. I can definitely talk about kind of that drive to provide for my family, that drive to
Mm-hmm.
provide well for my family, because then that projected well on me as a man, because I was a
Right.
good earner, and because I was able to provide for my wife and for my kids and all these things. That made me a good man.
Mm-hmm.
I have jettisoned all of that, because what I realized is that living to that image that was not living out of my authentic self
Mm-hmm.
was exhausting. Trying
Right.
to live
Well,
up to the American version of a man was exhausting for
right.
me.
Well, I like you to do two things, because we mentioned the
Mm,
den in the opening, and you
mm,
rarely miss those calls. This past week, you weren't on that call, and we got to
mm,
talking about, because one of the guys had a very vulnerable and honest conversation about his own challenges,
mm,
um, from a man's perspective as a caregiver.
mhm,
It ended up shifting to as men and anger, and we've never talked about that before from a caregiving perspective. And I was like, wait a minute. That's something any and everybody can relate to. Not everybody's in a situation where that anger is rage and extreme, and people are
mm,
hurt or things are broken or whatever have you. But it frays at a relationship and a marriage. So speak about that in terms of what you thought it meant to be a man,
mm.
generally speaking, and how that affected what you brought to the table as a father to a son with autism? Because if you have a daughter with autism and we're talking about that, that's a different interaction and dynamic altogether. So
Mhm.
talk about that.
Well, I'll tell you what that brings up for me is for many years I was very involved in a church life. And I went to many men's prayer groups and men's meetings in
Mm-hmm.
that church circle. And what I knew was acceptable was men were being a workaholic was acceptable, having anger issues were acceptable because those are male traits,
Mm-hmm.
quote unquote, right? And so
Yep.
those things were acceptable, but some of the other things, fear, lust, um, um, were not acceptable, right? So you were in these environments where men were quote unquote encouraged to be real with one another, but there was acceptable realness and there was unacceptable realness. And
Mm-hmm.
so I look back on that now, and again, it kind of fed into that same mindset of the old school man image, right? You fight hard, you get angry, but that makes you competitive, and because you're competitive, you can get ahead in the industry you're in. Those kinds of things. Those were all
Mm-hmm.
acceptable male traits, but fear, weakness,
Uncertainty.
being emotional, uncertain, unsure of yourself, a lack of confidence, those things were not acceptable. And it, it,
Mm-hmm.
it didn't make you look good as a man. So I am
Yeah.
very thankful that we're now living in an age where those standards are no longer being projected everywhere you look. And
Right.
people are now very open and talking about encouraging everyone to live out of their authentic selves, whatever that means for the individual. So I don't know if I touched on when I think about
You
Isaac, my son, who, oh, go ahead. Did you want to say something? Yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say out of curiosity, and hopefully it's not too off the beaten path, but you talking about what is or was and was not acceptable in that church setting is not surprising. But I'm curious. I don't think anybody would have that written as a rule. How did you find out that those things weren't acceptable? Did somebody express those things and they were shunned or encouraged not to? How did you discover that?
It's kind of more in the vibe or the feedback you'd get in the rooms. There were no rules, right? This is nobody's going to
Right.
tell you, well, that's not acceptable. But if I would say, um, I got frustrated with my kids, or got angry with my kids, or I kind of lost my temper driving my car, all the heads in the church prayer, all the men, yeah, 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 they all agree with that, right?
Yeah.
Um, and when I found on occasions when I would share some of the things that were disturbing me more deeply that weren't quote unquote falling into the acceptable, there'd be a lot of
Mhm.
silence in that room, like nobody knew what I was talking about. So um,
Mm.
I think I learned by feedback. These are things we can talk about, you'll get agreement on in this group. Those other things we don't know nothing about that, so we're not giving you feedback there. We're not part of it. And so
Yeah.
I for me, this is my experience. I learned very quickly. Again, there was acceptable male Christianity, and there was unacceptable male Christianity because
Mm.
that's the religion I was involved in. So I don't know. Does that answer your question?
It does, and I think it sheds light. A little bit of light leads to brighter light so often because now it's made
Mm-hmm.
me think. It's not limited to Christianity, and this was
Mm-mm.
we didn't decide to make this episode. One that's designed to promote the den, but it's why we created it because
Mm-hmm.
those biases or rules exist, and what happens is if they're written, then you can say, well, wait a minute, I have a question and ask.
Mm-hmm.
When it's an unwritten rule, it's a little more clandestine or covert. If you're not paying
Mm-hmm.
attention, you don't even find out that that's not acceptable, and as a result
Mm-hmm.
of it not being acceptable, you don't get what you need, and you don't realize that you just spent time to be in an environment to get something and didn't get what you need until you've left the environment and reflect after the
Mm-hmm.
fact. So
Yeah.
that's very,
Yeah.
very telling. So go ahead and talk about that. And I'll do the same. You were going to talk about how that's what your idea of what you think it means to be a man. That's what you bring to the table when you become a father, but especially when you become the father of a son, and
Yeah.
then that diagnosis takes place. So tell us about
Yeah.
talk about that path a little bit, and I'll make sure I do the same.
Well, I have two sons, one neurotypical. My youngest son, Isaac, has autism and he's diagnosed at age 3. Um, I think fortunately for me, because I have 5 children, so I had 3 girls first. So they kind of trained me about connecting, I think, on the emotional level because they're my little girls and I wanted them to know I cared. And so that work with them or that those relationships with them, I think prepared me to be much more open and emotional with my kids, with my sons. Um, and I feel grateful that I had daughters first, right? Because I think it, like I said, set me up to understand that it's very important to connect with my children on an emotional level and be empathetic and be a listener so that when by the time I had Isaac, the fifth of my 5 kids, I had had years of experience of learning to be patient and listen and accepting of who they were. And I saw very quickly, having had 5 kids, they all come out very uniquely different, right? There are personalities that
Hmm.
come right out of the womb. My oldest daughter to this day is a grinder. I mean, that girl is hardcore and she's always been who she is. And then my second daughter was just a little angel that slept a lot and, was always smiling and very, very introverted. And so I kind of learned through these personalities as we had them and I got to know them and I got to love them that I really wanted to encourage them to be who they are. Um, and that I think I did a decent job of not trying to cast my vision for who I want them to be or how I
Hmm.
want them to act onto them and really allow them to, we homeschooled. I've talked about that. We homeschooled our kids and we really let homeschooling be driven by who they were and what they were interested in. So
Hmm.
I think that background also gave me that opportunity to not try to dictate to my sons what masculinity looks like or how they should be as boys and then now as young men. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Wow. Okay, that that says a lot, and I commend you for that because you've heard me comment on this before that parenting or becoming a parent is a selfish thing to an extent, in that you want to play a part in creation, especially if it's just generally speaking, or if like I'm in love with this person and we can create a child.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do that, you want to introduce to your child, regardless of gender, some of your favorite things, and you hope
Mm-hmm.
that they like them. And I
Mm-hmm.
would think with most men, once you have a son, you're looking at your favorite sports teams, your favorite music, all of that kind of stuff. So for you to
Mm-hmm.
be a father with a son on the way and you're thinking, I just want him to be who he's going to be. It's funny how we're talking about masculinity, but what's become a theme of this episode already, and you brought it up twice, and it's just really resonated with me, and I think it will with the audience as well, which is the most important thing is to be true to yourself and your core. And so much of
Mm-hmm.
society tells us otherwise because everybody's got an idea as to who you're supposed to be and just what box you're supposed to go into. So I want to commend you
Mm-hmm.
for that because I think that's a very big deal. So then talk about, if you will, then first noticing developmental delays and things of that sort, and up to the diagnosis of Isaac, and what your thought is from a male perspective as that's taking place.
Yeah. Well, this I always kind of give this with a warning. Isaac was very early in developing. My son with autism was very early in words and cruising the furniture and all that stuff. So he was very early, kind of like my first daughter. By 10 months, she was walking and babbling words, and Isaac was kind of on the same track. And then at the 16 to 18-month mark, he got the MMR, and again, I don't want to start to open that can of worms, but
Yeah.
very quickly we noticed things begin to regress. He was using less words and less eye contact and all that good stuff. So um, I can't say I was acutely aware of it. My wife more so. when he started missing milestones. Again, this is our fifth child, so we've been
Hmm.
through milestones and the kind of progression of our kids. And I think a little bit after two, she's like, something's funny. He's just not. He's kind of not where he was. He's not babbling like he used to, not saying words like he used to. Um,
Hmm.
and we didn't get the official, and we were in the midst of moving to another state, and a lot of stuff was going on. So we didn't get the official diagnosis till right at 3 years old.
Right.
Um, so and again, I'm still kind of in the midst of the old school man thing, working, trying to make a living, trying to provide for my family. So I still had a lot to learn about being truly observant in the home and being really clued
Hmm.
in to where my kids were and what they needed emotionally. Um, this was still on the early side of my beginning to understand,
In your
you
evolution.
know, yeah, exactly, my own evolution, right?
Yeah.
To finding my own authenticity, because the other piece of my puzzle, and I've shared this with you before, is I'm a child of the 60s and 70s, and opportunities for African American men, the doors were starting to open there, and they weren't being as restricted as they were. And my parents were constantly saying, you gotta work harder, be faster, do all this stuff to be able to succeed. And I bought into that wholeheartedly. And part of that was even kind of burying my African American background and being as professional and, dare I say, as white as possible, so that I could be successful in the business world. And again, so as my kids were being born and Isaac was being born, I was kind of just beginning to open the door of that journey of really finding myself authentically, and then presenting
Hmm.
that to the world. So I can't say I was particularly observant at the beginning
Yeah.
of Isaac's life.
Yeah.
So.
Wow. That's interesting. In my case, you know, I met my wife Laura. She had two daughters from her previous marriage. We had Elijah, and I think she would probably agree, but she's never really confirmed this. But I think part of the reason why she noticed his delays and I didn't is because she had, been raising two girls, and girls mature faster than boys. I didn't notice anything in any kind of delay. I mean, he could, pull out an eyelash, and I would just think, oh my gosh, he did that with such flair. That's incredible.
Yeah,
Wow,
yeah.
that's my boy.
Uh-huh.
You know, so I didn't see, and then it becomes a blur when you notice the first thing not speaking quite the. And to me, really, that whole period where we went to his primary care physician, and he said, "Well, some of the symptoms that you're seeing, are signs of autism." But the challenge is, some of those symptoms are symptoms of a normal, healthy child. I was like, I could have told you that. Where does
Mhm,
that leave us? So what do you do?
mhm,
And the response is, you get him into early intervention. We did.
mhm,
He's diagnosed at 3. We had speech therapists, come over to the house, and before we got into ABA and all of that kind of stuff. And I don't know that I necessarily thought about something from, anything from a man's perspective per se, but you know, as a child, if you put me and academics in a room and close the door and turn off the light, academics is going to be standing over me with his hands on his fist, and I'll be bleeding from the mouth with two black eyes on the ground. I just,
mhm,
I just didn't do well academically. I was always physically in a classroom, but not mentally. And I was
mhm,
never
mhm,
diagnosed with anything. My parents used every resource that they possibly could, but because I struggled academically and at the same time thought that I was intelligent, I thought, is there anything about this that I've passed on to him? How does
mhm,
that possibly work?
mhm,
And so
mhm,
that was the closest that I could come to thinking, if I had anything to do with it, that I give him that. I don't think I had as much as we hear most men talk about, the whole, I just got to fix it. I got to fix it. I got to just tune out. And I didn't have that, nor was I in any kind of denial. There's
mhm,
some that have the school of thought that, hey, you just throw a football around, he'll be okay. Just like people
mhm,
think, you know, he won't eat so and so. He's got sensory issues. Yeah, just put it in front of him. When he's hungry, he's going to eat. So I didn't have
mhm.
too much of that kind of struggle. Did you have any of that? Would you say?
struggles with kind of accepting his autism, and I'm
Yeah.
not quite sure what you. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, well, I guess I didn't know what autism was. It wasn't as prevalent then. My son's now 23 years old, so it wasn't
Right.
nearly as prevalent then. We were kind of at the front of that wave of autism, kind of really becoming
Blowing up.
an epidemic amongst our
Hmm.
kids. So I hadn't really heard the term before. Didn't really know what it meant. Didn't understand how profound the challenges could be there. So
Hmm.
initially, it was just kind of okay. What is autism? What does it mean? What is it? Of course, like any parents, what does that mean for his future, right? Um, so I can't say I think it was just trying to learn what autism is and how it can help my son. So that was where my attention was and my efforts were. Um, and I don't know that I got. There are people who just didn't know what it was, and it's like, and it was really hard to explain what it was because we didn't really know. We just knew it meant he was
Yeah.
developmentally delayed. There were challenges in connecting emotionally, and really, I will say is that one of the things, the characteristics that they talked about very uh, um, profoundly, or spoke much about, was how autistic kids had challenges connecting emotionally with the people
Hmm.
around them. And that for me and my wife were both like, man, we don't want that for him. We don't want him to, not be able to. So back then there was ABA therapy, and there was also called kind of RDA, relational development therapy. And as we were
Hmm.
deciding which path to take, we wanted him to be able to connect with people relationally. So we went more down those protocols of intervention, as opposed to the ABA and the very kind of rigid academic structure on ABA. We opted
Hmm.
for RDA because, and to this day, my son is very emotional. He can read people's faces and understand what they're feeling, and we're very
Right.
grateful for that capability that he has.
Mm. Mm. I would say, we've been blessed with the same thing with regard to, Elijah as well. And it's interesting. I think that, or at least
Mhm.
I wonder how, what role having an emotionally available father plays in that taking place.
I would imagine, and I'm not talking about me. I'm just talking about any father, that it's got to be really important for a child to know that the heart of their parent is open to them, that the heart of their
Hmm.
parent is sensitive to them and their challenges. I would imagine that would be an incredible gift to the kids whose dads, and I guess we're talking about a masculine, whose dads make themselves available to their kids in that way. And I'm not shaming anybody or judging anybody that just can't connect that way, but I think it's important. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree. I would agree. Um, and it's interesting because we'll talk about this topic, more in, other episodes. But I'm just now thinking, generally speaking, um, uh, how not only how all of this connects, and what for caregiving females, femininity, means to them and everything. Because I think that, again, like I always say, anything that affects the general population affects our community 10 times more so. And I think the definition of both femininity and masculinity have been, um, should I say, tested, if not redefined, over the last 5 to 10 years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good.
And so, and I think that that affects society as a whole, but again, especially in our community, so if we're talking about, like, the conversation I said that we had on our call the other night, we are talking about anger and how that affects, because I don't it's the other thing, I don't even hear anything about women, mothers, getting angry per se. And I know that that does have to happen, especially, for those that are single. But
Mhm.
I'll tell you, for me, where some of my challenges have come in terms of being able to deal with outbursts, whether it's his or mine.
Mhm,
um, you
mhm,
know,
mhm.
because it would start with me. It would start where he went through. Elijah went through a phase where he would be sleeping and just. And let me preface this. This is not judgment, but I know there's some people in support groups that I've seen that will make comments on social media. Well, we're on our third TV this year because it's the third one that their child is just broken in terms of anger. And I know people and
Right,
have
right,
family members who actually have, you know, um, children with autism that have to be as adults put into a group home because it's just too much to handle. We haven't
right.
been to that extreme, but there were instances where, especially prior to any kind of medication to help with anxiety and sleep, Elijah would
Mhm,
just
mhm,
wake up just screaming and come kind of just grab you,
mhm,
and be really loud. And
mhm,
at a certain age, it's manageable, and Laura's not as quick
mhm,
to kind of get physical to just kind of hold him down. But after a while, I
mhm,
got to the point where I was the only one that could do that anyway. And what it
mhm,
might
mhm.
mean is me literally getting on top of him and holding him down, because while he's verbally wasn't able to express that maybe what he needs is a squeeze, or you give it to him anyway and he's still just like screaming and trying to squeeze and grab you. And sometimes
Mhm,
that would take
mhm,
place 2 3 in the morning, and
mhm.
just wears you out. That might frustrate me more
Yeah,
than anything else. But then there's other times where maybe he's not listening, or something takes place and you're just short because you're
mhm,
human.
mhm,
And
mhm, mhm.
um that's taken a whole lot of work. I just work to try and get myself
Yeah,
in his shoes. um
yeah.
and it might,
Let
and sometimes it just, maybe it's even the stimming or something like that, which is a matter of, I feel guilty saying this too, but sometimes, sometimes, often, most times, if not all the time, that's just a way of getting out that which can't be released any other way. But
Mhm,
it
mhm.
doesn't excuse the fact that at that given moment, you might have less patience than you
Right.
ordinarily would. Yeah, you were going to say something.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't want to give a wrong impression. It has been a long journey for me to get to a place where I don't get angry. Um, for a long time, with all my children, if I detected what I thought of as disrespect,
There you go.
my my anger, my response would be outsized for whatever they were
Don't you
doing.
ever.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So I don't want the last thing I would do is come off like I've been a perfect father, and I'm no. I would say it's probably in the last 3 or 4 years, and that was really kind of after kind of grabbing my son and shaking him because he was yelling at my wife, and just there was kind of no bringing him down from a big blow up, and I'm
Mhm.
grabbing him and grabbing his shirt, and my wife is going, "Don't you ever do that? I'm going to call the police." I'm like, wow. So it made me think about, I've never punched my kid, but I've grabbed him really firmly, and just kind
That
of
makes you feel
pulled his
like
shirt up like
crap,
this.
though. Yeah,
Oh yeah. So
horrible.
having that said to me, like, wow, that and then I don't know. I think it was a moment, because it snapped something in me, like, my son has autism. He cannot control his emotions. I'm an adult. I should be able to kind of be in this situation and keep my cool no matter what happens.
Mhm.
And that was kind of a pivot point for me, where I no longer needed to grab him physically. I no longer needed to control his emotions, because that's what I was trying to do, is corral or control his emotions.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think my ability to just kind of stay calm and cool this is going to be a really weird tangent, but I'm a football fan, and all
Yeah.
these greatest quarterbacks these days talk about the fact that they're able to kind of stay level headed, whether things are high or low. They kind of stay
Mhm.
even keel, and it
Yeah.
almost feels like, for me in my own life, since I've come to that moment where I could stay even keel as things were going up or down or wherever they were going, it's almost like Isaac's being able to respond to that. and I'm able to speak to him in a tone that really de-escalates. It kind of brings him down. And even if for a little while he's still stimming hard or talking ugly and angry, because I can speak back to him with a calm tone, usually very quickly it kind of brings it down.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's only been, I'd say, the last 3 or 4 years, because
Yeah.
if he was barking or talking really loudly to my wife, I felt like I needed to step in and protect her, or
Mm-hmm.
protect one of the siblings. And it's like, I again, it was me kind of going to that edge too far, and my wife saying, that's not okay. You can't be grabbing him like that. Um, it, it it snapped something in me, and it made me realize that I've got to find a different way. And
Mm-hmm.
from that point on, I've been able to kind of just stay in whatever the circumstance is and still respond to him with a calm voice,
Mm-hmm.
even if he's kind of barking back at me at first, and I don't
Yeah.
take it as disrespect. I'm reminding myself my son has autism, and it doesn't allow him to do some of the things that, to respond in ways that maybe he would choose to if his autism, weren't at play here. And
Mm-hmm.
that has really changed the way I'm able to be with him in all kinds of circumstances. And I'm very grateful that my wife threatened me with calling the cops, because it took me hearing that, I think, to go, wow, this is not cool.
Yeah.
It's too extreme a reaction to a child that has a disability, or a young man that has a disability. So, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And
So,
if you know what that does for me is when I have my moments where I lose my patience, I stop and think, gosh, I love him and I would take a bullet for him. If
mm,
my patience is challenged, then so too would anybody else's be. And then that's where you worry about this time several things, which is just the day when they're not at home, whether it's in school or any other kind of setting, to say nothing of the time when that comes when we exist in memory only. Because
yeah.
you're like, I'm a work in progress and I'm
Mhm,
working diligently to be peaceful about it and not have him, because much like Isaac, Elijah is very in tune, generally speaking, with people, but especially with Laura and I. And that's what she always tells me. She goes, and I hate to say this, but there's times where I'm within inches of he started it. I'm not saying that, but I'm like, he's doing so and so. How can I not respond to that? Like, no, well, you know what?
yeah, yeah,
You're the you need to keep calm. He's going to respond to how you
yeah,
speak. I'm like,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah. And you just can't stop punching in the clock and doing the work to
yeah.
evolve. And it's interesting that when we talk about just what it means to be a man and masculinity and everything, I just always thought pretty much what you've said in the beginning, which is you need to be true to yourself. Just like when people have um, such a strong desire or such heavy proponents of masculinity to the point where
Mm,
they are threatened or challenged by feminine equality, they also
mm,
tend to be people that don't like the idea of any form of homosexuality or anything like that. And
mm,
what made me
mhm,
think of is when you say being true to your core and yourself, you're encompassing any and all of that, which is something that I love and appreciate, because we are who we really, really are deep down inside. And if we don't
mm,
connect with whatever that is or means for each of us, there will be conflict in our lives. And that's why I
mhm,
think there are a lot of people that walk around angry too. Um,
mhm, mhm.
and don't even
Angry or exhausted.
necessarily, yeah, there you go. And don't know why they're angry, you know?
Mhm,
Um, but I'm saying all that to say that, you know, if we're evolving, that's more accurate, evolving human beings,
mhm,
what is it, what does it say about those who, might not be, and they're out and about, where our kids are, and
mm,
and they interact. And those are the things that I think I worry about more than anything else. I'm like, I'm more self-aware and more conscious than most people, but I still feel like I have light years to go. And at the same
mhm,
time,
mhm,
a little more patient than most. But if I'm that which I've just described, and I still have, so far to go, then man, what does that mean for the people that, that he encounters and everything? Um,
Mm.
that's just that's just a tough road to go. Tell me something. Talk a little bit about, because I know that in order to get where you've not gotten, but where you're going as well, what's helped you a lot and played a great role is your breathing exercises that you've done.
Yeah. This world, it feels to me like it's built to wind you up. Just
Now more than
politically,
ever.
business wise, emotionally, even entertainment wise. Like I used to be a gamer. I used to play games, and now I can't because of stress. It's like games wind me up, and so I guess it's because I'm getting older. I just keep having to pare away things that bring stress to my life. So
Mhm.
I feel like this world is just built to keep winding you up.
I'm
Um,
putting a pin in
and
that because that's something worth coming back to. Getting
yeah,
rid of things that cause you stress. That's huge.
yeah.
Go. We're going to come back to that. Go ahead.
Yeah, so for me, I also realize as I'm getting on, my body is getting tighter. It feels like the older you get, the more things kind of start shrinking in and turning in on itself. And so um, I had 10, 12 years ago been involved in yoga classes and just recalled how good it made me feel. And
Hmm.
I decided, well, I'm gonna start with just breath work. And so I just got on YouTube and looked up. I'd done some kind of calm meditations, and they were talking about breathing, and I'm like, okay, well, I really like the way breath work makes me feel. So this is maybe 18 months or so ago. I started practicing breath work, and that whole deep breath, shallow breaths. There's various techniques I found were very good for me physically and emotionally because they bring me down, they quiet my nervous system. Um, it would just allow me to be better in my day, or fall asleep more easily at night, or whenever I was practicing those techniques. And then I added yoga practice on top of it. So between the strain and the stretch of yoga and breath work, it's been very good for me, not only physically but emotionally. So um, I am, and again, it's probably a function of just getting older. Is I evaluate a lot of things I do in my life now, and I'm looking for peace, and I'm looking for
Hmm.
quiet, I'm looking for calm. So I find myself kind of, I've been in the gym my whole life, but I don't really do a whole lot of weight anymore. Occasionally I'll get
Hmm.
into the weights, but usually it's more yoga yeah, it's pretty much these days it's yoga because I don't need the big buff muscles anymore. Not that I don't like still looking, appropriate physically. Well, that's a funny
Yeah.
man thing. I'll be honest with you. I have spent my whole
Hmm.
life in the gym because I had an image of what masculinity looked like, right?
Hmm.
And it's broad shoulders and a big chest and big arms. And so I've spent 30, 40 years in the gym trying to match that image of masculinity.
Yeah.
And and now I feel like I'm transitioning more to health and
Hmm.
happiness and feeling whole and good in myself, and not so much walking around like the big buff dude. So yeah,
It's funny.
we are evolving. I am evolving.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. You made me think of several things. Growing up, even though my dad was the son and product of a man who was a man's man, he was always physical and everything. But we had weights around, but that wasn't a big thing. He was into martial arts. We both were. He became a sensei and everything, and he was always not against just walking around with big muscles, but I always thought that, you know, he had a disdain for being strong on the outside and weak on the inside. And the people that
Mm,
usually had the biggest muscles and the biggest mouths were usually the scariest as opposed to the scariest individuals. So I grew up
mhm,
for a while thinking like, even though I ran, played football and basketball and did everything, I was like, I don't know if I want to pick up any weights, man. I do not want to pick up. I just don't want to blow up. I didn't want to have to pay
mm,
somebody to scratch my head. I kept thinking that would happen. My biceps would be too huge, something like that. And then so much so that in the '90s, with my brother and a friend of mine, we would go to the gym and play basketball, and when they would hit weights, I'd just be like, "Y'all can do that," and I just wouldn't. And then I realized it's so weird to think about. getting back to evolution and change, the idea of working out in front of other people to
Mhm.
me was like strange. I felt like stuff like I should be working out in private, picking up weights. I have no idea
Oh,
why.
not
Maybe it's
me.
because
Like, do you see these guns, bro? I just pumped them up. You and I are opposite in
none of
so many
that.
ways. It cracks me up.
I know, right? But we've been so
Yeah.
close like this,
Yes.
forever.
Yeah. It's pretty funny.
But you know what
Yeah.
it was? I think what it was too is my idea. If I wanted to look like somebody, it was going to be Bruce Lee, and Bruce Lee was more about definition than he was about man.
Mm,
So I think I
yeah.
didn't mind picking them up, but it was never a conscious thought. But I thought I was like, oh, I'm not
Mhm.
picking up the biggest weights, and maybe I didn't want anybody
Mhm.
to see. I don't know. And then I
Mhm.
eventually, when you shower at the gym, I was showering in swimming trunks because I'm like, you're not seeing my behind. There's no need for you to. And then after a while, that just none of that matters. Now I work out at home just because I like being home.
Convenience.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
convenient, and I have
Yeah.
enough discipline to do it. But it's
Mhm.
interesting because you talk about transforming and growing and everything. My wife has, gotten me into different crystals and things like that. And so that's what for those that are looking at, on the YouTube channel versus hearing it on a different platform. I have a bracelet on. It's got different crystals, and they each of the stones represents different things, but this particular one is geared towards change or transformation. And
Mm,
the idea is that you put it on and set an intention. And for me, that intention is, I empower myself to dissolve and release anything that no longer serves me. I transform.
mm, mm,
And in business and in life, I've had mentors that put together business plans. And I think I might have talked to you about this before. And one of them is a great guy, successful, has a son by the name of Elijah who's on the autism spectrum as well. And
interesting.
he would begin his training on what you call, some call it a business plan, it's more of a life plan. And you begin it by writing your eulogy. And if you think about it,
Mm,
living intentionally, if you don't live intentionally, you're going to hope that people say nice things about you when you pass
mm,
away. Well, there's a far cry of difference between, does that make sense? A far cry of difference? Maybe I'm just making up my own terms. But there's a big difference between hoping people say something about you and then engineering a life that through actions allow you to do certain things, whereby if
mhm.
people speak truthfully about you, they will say those things because that's what you've actually done. And it
Right.
also starts with when do you pass away? Now we don't get to finally like say, but why not
Mhm.
plan or try to live life that way? And so it would be very big and elaborate and everything. And this past year, I saw something that was a lot more simple. Here's a short list of things you're going to do each day to make sure you make the most out of your day, month, week, year, and life. But before
Mhm.
you write those things down, clutter. You were talking about getting rid of things that don't serve you. I just mentioned the intention with the bracelet, talking about I allow myself to release myself of anything that doesn't serve me. And so it talked
Mhm.
about doing that physically. I found so many things in my closet that I didn't need. And I'm going to continue to do that because I realize that I hold on to a lot of things that I don't necessarily need. Now, that's not limited to masculinity or femininity, but I think it applies to anyone regardless of gender. And so, you know, being the best human being that I could possibly be, you know, starts with something like that. And I think if you're not, again, you can never tire of raising your consciousness. Think about what it is you think about as opposed to just living on autopilot, because you'd
Mhm.
be surprised what it is you can do without. Like if you think about it, and I can go on a whole tangent, which you know very well. But if you think about the amount of food that most of us eat, right? We
Mhm.
eat so much more than we
Mhm.
need. And I'm not talking about being overweight. I'm just talking about what you
Mhm.
need in order to survive. Now, if you look at just surviving and not enjoying food, you can live on crumbs and water for weeks at a time. So I'm not saying that you should
Mhm.
ration yourself to the point of massive denial, but we
Mhm.
we take more than we need, generally
For sure.
speaking.
For sure.
And I think as we get older, once we realize that which is the very most important, that's why we're able to take certain things and I don't really know that I need this. It doesn't have to be something that's bad for you. It might be something that serves its purpose and somebody else can benefit from it,
Mhm.
depending on
Mhm.
where they are in life and at that given moment.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
I don't know. That's just you know my thought. Um, but it'll be interesting to see what happens as we go forward into this year in this world and in this country as to
Mhm.
what continues to define masculinity. And I so appreciate what you said about being true to one's core self because I think that is the answer to everything. And it takes me back to the whole idea of trying to be more childlike, less childish.
Mhm. Mhm.
The closer we get to our departure from the womb, the closer we are to us just being who we are.
Mhm. Mhm.
Just that purity. I've often
Mhm.
said when my wife and I first started dating, before when I first met her sister's kids, and before we ended
Mhm.
up adopting them, the youngest of the boys, he touched my head and he says, "Shawn, your hair feels like paper." And I I laughed and I was so appreciative of that. And I'm like, that's the key to saving the world. Because if you take a
Mhm.
bunch of children and put them together and they're different nationalities, races, and genders and everything, they're not going to judge. They may actually ask, one that's fair in complexion or white may ask one that's, black or darker in complexion, hey, just do you sunburn? Like they just would want to know. So we can
Mhm.
never tire of our efforts to raise our curiosity about ourselves and each other because we spend so much time going through life being who we're supposed to be, like you said, not being true to your core self. That's the answer to everything. So, we can do so much for the world if we continue to try and figure out who that person might be for yourself, encourage others to do the same. And I
Mhm.
don't know that it's something you wake up one day and just you might, but it continues to evolve. And there's some power in asking yourself, like, when is the last time you did something for the first time?
Mhm.
You know, for a lot of people, it's just I don't know, I have no idea, which means
Mhm.
that you're closer to just taking up space than actually living.
Hmm. I'll have to think on that one. I haven't that's. I don't think I've heard you. Maybe I've heard you say that before, but I'd have to think on that one.
No, I haven't
That's
said that one
that's
before. I
provocative
didn't
for me. So I'm like, I got to think about that.
Yeah. I didn't create it though, but I would imagine for you the answer is, I mean, you jumped out of a plane. So you're not just like a wild adventurer, but you're like, you're open. Like,
Mhm.
over the summer, we're like, we got an extra ticket to go see the Marley Brothers. Are you free? Like tonight. And you're like, wait a minute, let me, and you move things around and went, right? So that's I find depth in everything at this age too. That's another thing. Youth really is wasted on the young because when you're young, you don't have this stuff, man. When people hear that, I always bring that up. When you hear that, you think of the ability to run fast and jump high at a young age, and that's wasted. No, it's not just that. It's like
Mhm. Mhm.
getting older is like developing a superpower.
Mhm.
You know, and now if you're
I
not,
agree with that wholeheartedly. I do. I agree with
yeah,
that wholeheartedly. It just
yeah,
really, for me, it feels like it's allowed me to, can I say it, weed out so much bullshit I believed when I was younger. Just what it
exactly.
means to
Which
be
you
a
couldn't
man, what
help.
it means to be an American, what it means to be a father, what it means. I mean, it's just like the world has fed us so much crap to keep us distracted, to keep us sick, to keep us, angry with one another, that we don't really
Hmm.
connect with who we are, and we're not able to bring who we are to other people authentically and allow them that space to do the same and find the connection that I believe God built us to be connected entities, connected beings that love one another and care for one another. But this world is not designed that way. This world is
No, and
designed to kind of keep us as rats on the wheel. So
hmm
as I get older, I kind of see the cage and the wheel, and
yep.
I keep trying to push myself away from participating in life in that
And how can
fashion.
you do
So
that if you don't know who you are?
yeah,
You know,
yeah. Yeah.
this show, you know, I want to thank everyone that's supported our previous podcast, Just Two Dads, and those who are supporting this new adventure in Beyond the
Mhm.
Spectrum. And so there's been some months between the last episodes of Just Two Dads and the first episode of Beyond the Spectrum, which this is number 3. Um, but despite that, there's still a certain amount of it that is being done on the fly and creating as we go. And I think because of our conversation today, it's worthwhile going back to that question that I closed that I would usually close Just Two Dads with, um,
Mm.
which is, you know, give one example if you can. And I've asked you it before, and the answer should probably evolve. But give an example of one thought or belief that you once believed strongly, but no longer believe to
Mm.
be true.
Well, I think you've asked me this before, and my answer has been the same, because it's been the biggest player in my life over the last 30 or 40 years. And that
Mm-hmm.
is what it means for me to be in relationship with Christ. And
Mm-hmm.
that was very defined by a religious system for a lot of years. Um,
Mm,
and that reality for me has changed profoundly over the last 10 years. There's a phrase out there called kind of deconstructed Christianity, and that's
mm.
where I find myself now. So, um, yeah, that's the big one for me over the last decade.
Okay. Wow, that's fantastic. Um, I don't know which one applies for me. It seems like those, the answer to that thing, it evolves like all the time. I will say, in the most just pure and natural sense, I'm not where I want to be, but I've made a lot of progress in caring less what people think. And
Mm,
again, like anything that applies to the
mhm,
general population applies in our community
mhm,
10 times more so. Elijah and I were in the store last week, and I think I talked about this on I talked about it on our call for the den. We were in the store. When we go to the store, he wants to get his the shopping cart first, then he'll pick up brochures of any and every kind, and then he'll use a bathroom. And he wants to flush every toilet in that bathroom. And I told him
mhm,
as we were going to the store, I said, you know what we should probably do? We should probably go in there and use the bathroom first, then we can get the cart. Because if we leave the cart out here and it's empty, we might come out and find it gone.
mm,
And
mhm,
he didn't listen to me, and he sped up and started walking really fast. I said, hey, wait, where are you going? He said,
mhm,
you got a shopping cart. And I'm like, okay, so you heard what I said, but you want to get a cart anyway, right? And he says, yes. I said, okay, then just tell me that. And this is me thinking I'm really evolved, and I'm not telling him, oh, damn it, we're not doing this, we're doing so and so, because again, that'll
mhm,
disrespect thing. So he gets the cart anyway because that's what he wants to do. He gets the brochures for everything, recipes from the fish market, from the butcher, just things that he's not necessarily going to use. Fill
mhm,
them up in the top of the cart. Pushes the cart near the bathroom. We go in the bathroom, use the code. We come out, the cart's gone. And I just said, this is what I was referring to, saying that they would take it. So now we got to get another cart and get all your brochures again. And there's a girl that walks by that works there, and he says to her, excuse me, can you tell me where the shopping cart? And I'm like, and I'm said to her, we're good. He knows where the shopping carts are. And I'm saying, and I said to him again,
yeah,
thinking I'm evolved, but why are you asking her where the shopping carts are? They're outside. You know where they are. And he's like, just, he's getting upset. And he's speaking back
mhm,
to me in his voice and grinding his teeth. And he goes over to the self
mhm,
checkout, and there's a guy at it with a cart, and he's getting ready to ask a guy who's a customer. He's like, "Excuse me," and I said, "No, no, come here," and I grabbed him, right, like, and
yeah,
really tight, and he's screaming at the top of his lungs. Brought him over off to the side, and I said, calm down, calm down. Put my hands on his face, on his cheeks. But I had squeezed his arm like to the point where like pinched him, like and
mhm, mhm,
I said, we have to get another shopping cart. These people, they're out, the carts are outside.
mhm,
And we got right past it, and it was fine and everything. But when we came home and I thought about it, and I felt really bad because I grabbed them firmly and everything.
mhm, mhm,
He was asking them if he knew where his shopping cart was.
mhm, mhm,
He wasn't trying to ask where the shopping cart is. And he has a habit of, if he wants something, like if I say we're not getting any cookies today, he'll ask someone
mhm,
else in the store and charm and damn near wink at him. Excuse me, can you tell me where the
yeah,
cookies are? And they'll go, oh, over
yeah,
here, young man. And then I look like the
mhm,
prick where I'm like, I said we ain't getting no cookie. So my first thought is that that's what he's doing, but that's not the case. So we got to
yeah,
continue to do the work that it takes to evolve.
yeah,
Man,
agreed,
um,
agreed.
the hour went by so fast, as it always does. Thank
Mhm,
everyone within the sound of my voice for tuning in. Again, if you or someone you know is a male and or caregiver, feel free to join us for our weekly conversation known as the Den. The registration it's free. We meet bi-weekly on Zoom. It will be in the link. And we want to again
Mhm.
thank our sponsors and partners at Billy Footwear. Maurice, thank you so much, man.
You too, man. Thank you.
And for those of you, again, within the sound of my voice, thank you for supporting the show. And you can find our website where you'll find all the episodes and merch that is on the way as well at beyondthespectrumpodcast.com. That is beyondthespectrumpodcast.com. Remember, try to be a little bit more childlike and less childish. And remember that questions are a little more powerful than words, more love and less judgment. Thank you so much. And we'll see you next time. And we love you.
Bye, everybody.